I would love to introduce you to our next guest. He is the creative director of Epostle.net. He is a multi-dimensional award-winning artist. He runs his own studio. He also is submerging himself and his artwork in technology and AI. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Gregory Beylerian.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Thank you all for having me here. What I'm going to dive into today is a conversation from my heart. So, notes that I have, and what I'm going to tell you now is also I'm going to implement to you how I'm creative, okay? And how this conversation will go. It will bridge my Armenian mystical roots, my Armenian OG Christianity, with my life as a creative and technology. I'm going to dance around these trinity from my heart. So I'm entering a state of presence, okay? What this means to me is relaxing into a vulnerable place where my mind is open, as Jesus said, without judgment, neutral perception is another way to understand it. To gain clarity, as the last speaker spoke with importance. What is clarity? One way I like to speak it is reality unobstructed. Then, by keeping my head, and by the way, what I'm about to tell you, I have learned comes from our Armenian Christian roots. And that discovery came from a lifetime of exploration with a very close friend of mine, Father Vazgen. I would discover the power of that this fundamental principle, when in 2014 he and I went to Armenia. He always promised me one day he would be the one to take me back to my ancestral roots. And there I start to see on the temple walls, the altar walls, I had to ask him, what is And what I began to learn was was a dimension of presence. And that's how I understood it to be. So I'm starting this lecture by giving you a fundamental understanding of how I'm going to talk to you today. I'm going to speak from my heart, from intuition. So there's no slides, there's no itinerary. It's very organic, and I'm in a trusting state. And the guidance of this trusting state, is, which I refer to as active intuition, I will say to you, without being dishonorable to the space, is a guidance from the divine direct. That can be argued in theoretical spaces, but I use my life as a practice experiment to see if I could live doing what I love most, which was to be creative. And it was the one career path that offered no illusion of security. And to commit my life, to devote my life to what I felt deepest in my heart would be a journey of overcoming fear. Now you may be wondering, how am I going to tie all this into creativity, to the Epostle, to the Armenian church, to divinity? This is the journey we're on. Are you guys with me so far? Okay. Okay. I'm the creative director of Epostle. We just produced this. This is we are a think tank. We are a bridge, a living bridge to the world. Engineered to bring the apostolic Christian treasure, wisdom, and humanity's solution to the world. And we do this by any tool currently available to us today. And as an artist, as a creator, we have a history of a relationship with the church. And in the time when it was stone, we carved truth into stone. When the printing press was created, we found a way to use paper. we found a way to use music, and we built structures, sacred geometric structures. Now let me take a moment to put some honor to the Armenian church. Now remember, I'm not raised in the Armenian church. I came to the Armenian church by my own fruition. Okay, I was born and raised in New York City by Armenian parents who were born in Egypt. My father's side is from Konya. My mother's side is Mancasu. Don't think the name exists anymore today in Turkey. I was raised in New York City as a child, not around an Armenian community. There was an Armenian church, but we weren't a part of it. My parents are very avant-garde. My dad is a visionary. His mother was a very creative being. And I even learned from my grandmother that we had an ancestor who painted the church's ceilings. So there's a connection. In my childhood, the only connection I knew was with my heart. You may not understand me this way, but up until about 20 or 18, I was a closed-off individual, shy to the world. My entire awareness and attention was inward. And I lived in my creativity, I lived in my imagination. Until this day, I live from intuition. Now, if I say what creativity is and why creativity is the solution to any problem in the world, creativity is the intelligence that brings innovation to any need in the world. We can understand what I'm talking about with creativity, for lack of a better word, is that it's an intelligence not of man, but is receivable by man. So I see creativity as God's intelligence. And all people, all human beings, up until the age of 5, there's a famous study commissioned by NASA. Every single human being is 100% creative at the age 5. They said 99.5. We're going to give that variable as the imperfect nature of data acquisition. By age 10, creativity dropped in this study. They had done a few 100,000 individuals to about 32%. By 15 years of age, it drops to 12%. By age 31, only 3% of the population is still creative. Now, why is this important to know? If creativity solves every problem that humanity has, innovates any opportunity and possibility that could make humanity part of evolutionary process better, why did we think creativity was just an artist's toolkit? No, it's a human right. And what am I saying that creativity is? And my experience and my exploration, so everything I say, please keep this in mind, it's just my perspective, is that creativity is what happens when your body is relaxed and open, your heart is relaxed and open, and your mind is relaxed and open. You become a conduit vessel of which trusting, or we could say in this context, faith, allowing to receive and feel free to trust the guidance of that intuition. And what I can tell you is that I devoted my life to this because of my love as a child to live as an artist. And to do that, I had to overcome fear. And everybody knows fear, and the world knows fear. And one way I could relate to how fear affects us on a personal level and on a social level is that fear could be the single most destructive component to a person's life. AI, we know there's fear now. And so how do we deal with fear? I believe my lecture speaks of the divine spark, creativity, and the soul's journey. I think that's what the topic was. Where do I get inspiration about this word, the divine spark? St. Gregory the Illuminator. Now, what happened to me was when I went with Father Voskin, for my first time back to Armenia, he took me to the pit. The second time we went back there, we brought more advanced technology, three-dimensional capabilities to capture the immersive experience of what it's like to be in that pit. Now you can put on a headset and experience what St. Gregory experienced. The difference is the light was kept on. Now I want you to understand that, imagine what it would be like to be put in a dark pit for 9 years. The most primordial experience a human has is the fear of the darkness. That's the first one that happens when you're a little kid. Now, in my experience as a person who has had to find a way to practice, and maybe we'll have to see with time if I can manage this, that what I'm talking about isn't just a belief, it's a living practice that Jesus bestowed to humanity. And what I discovered through my own exploration was preserved by the Armenian Church. And my teens, I started at age around 17, going to Europe. But this is before we had cell phones. All we had was a Let's Go book, a backpack, and no phones. And we said goodbye to our parents, and they went and see us for a few months. And then I lived there for a few years, doing my master's, continuing in this exploration of creativity. But what I want to tell you is I spent my life, I don't know why at that point, going from church to church, village to village. I would hop on a train and just go. I had no itinerary. I had no plan. I didn't even have money. I can't even tell you how I did it, except that it was on faith. And what motivated that process? I'm not sure. But it was I must have visited 1,000 churches from south of Spain, all through France, everyone, all through all of Europe. And then eventually I would go to the Middle East. Eventually I would end up in Jerusalem and meet the Archbishop there, and where we made 100 crosses holding sacred earth from the soil behind the burial chamber of Christ in the Armenian point. So there's 100 crosses that exist in the world today that hold this earth. And what I'm talking to you about is, if the Armenian Church, so when you look at all of the factors of society, I would tell you the most important one is the Armenian Church. That's funny coming from me, because many of you maybe don't recognize me on Sunday. Now, why am I telling you this? Because, and it's not any church, it's the Armenian Church, and I'm not saying this as an Armenian. And we're going to get to how this connects to AI. Because AI is a tool created from the consciousness of man, from creativity. And where does that come from? It comes from God. So if we become a servant of the divine, creativity is an extension of that, and the creator, the creative, uses whatever tools available at the time to judiciate out into the world what is needed, not desired. It's about what is needed in the world. So Epostle, in 1 year, if you get a chance, it's online digitally, but it's a great joy to have one physically, because it brings back the honor of magazines. If you guys remember the joy of having a magazine, it's coming back. This will reveal to you many things. We planted flags. Okay, what do I mean by that? When NASA went to the moon first, why it was so important is it changed and transformed the belief of humanity that we could do something we could never do before. That's a flag planting. They literally planted a flag. And sometimes the things you do, you may not see its direct value, but it's transformational in the consciousness of a society. When the first human broke the 4-minute mile in the late 50s, up until that point, it was thought physically impossible. The minute this man, in the Olympics, I think it was 1959, broke the 4-minute mile, he did it in like 3 minutes and 92 seconds, people were able to do it immediately after that. Why? Because the dimension of belief of which humans can be limited by expanded. So with the Epostle, we are a creative bridge to humanity to transmit the treasure that we found, which is at the base of Mount Ararat. Because it is, from my exploration, a resonance of truth. I have devoted my life to find out how to live from this creativity, how to experience abundance, how to experience freedom in my life. And I'm not saying this as a gloating. I'm saying this as a consequence of evidence of being an experiment. I allowed myself to be a sacrifice. What if it would all fail? Because it would be the greatest confrontation, fear. When you face fear and you allow fear to take hold of your system, your action becomes destructive. If I were to put fear and unconditional love, or the intelligence of God, on a chart just for us to comprehend what's incomprehensible, fear would be hell, and heaven would be ecstatic joy, unconditional love, total liberated state. And my experience was, creativity only flows through my system mechanically when I'm in a state of vulnerable truth, with a way of saying aligned to God's will. I'm using words to accommodate this space, okay? I teach this to kids too, and if they're not in an Armenian church structure, I'll use other words. And the way you can do that is when something is true, you can adjust accordingly. And part of the Apostle's ability is to have that openness to be a bridge to the world. Okay, so in this magazine, we utilize many visionary innovations. AI is one of them. Father Voskin mentioned how to communicate to people who speak another language. If you've ever watched a dubbed movie, it's not great. Okay, some would prefer the subtitles. We were the first, by the way, to do this, as far as I'm aware, in any kind of ministry form, to translate Father Voskin's teachings into 15 different languages. And we had that verified by people who spoke those languages natively, that the accent was perfect. We were able to choose, my friends from Mexico City, I said, oh, I can choose a Mexico City accent. Let's try it. He says it's exact to the nuances that we know about local language. We did this. So what did this do? As we noticed in Armenia, we saw a lot of foreign tourists. We want to embrace, we want to connect with them. They can hear our message in their native language now. Okay, we did a few other things. Would you like to hear a few other of the innovations we've done? Okay, remember, these are techniques and technologies just as a tool using the power of creativity, which is essentially allowing our guidance by God to transmit. We're called to do this, and this is how the structure works. We're not afraid of the tool, because if I'm afraid, see what happens when you're afraid? If you're afraid of the enemy, you're going to either try to remove them. I have a no genocide button right here, because there's what I would call, from my research and my experiences in Armenian, this looks like that to me. I don't want this to be political, but for me, it resonates. Any innocent soul on the planet that's killed in such a way deviates from my aligned truth. So we could say, why is that happening? Could we say that fear is the consequence? This is the consequence of fear. So we are using technology as a means to find solutions. And the way we access solutions is creativity. The way to access creativity, which is the intelligent, remember, it's not coming from What did Einstein say? It was brought up. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Now, how did Einstein, if you read his biography, how did he, as a scientist, access creativity? He would play his violin. It would put him in a relaxed, trance-like state, and the ideas came to him. Then he used his intellect to construct it into a way he could understand it and communicate to the world, but it came to him. So what I'm saying is, when we look at the world and we want to solve the problems in the world, we have to learn how to face our own fear first. And it's not about removing what we're afraid of. It's about holding presence in the face of fear, so that we, in a presence in a certain qualitative way that can be practiced. Remember, we are all living expressions of this possibility. We were all born this way. It may mean we need a structure like the church to help realign us to this possibility. That's what Epostle is here to do. And Epostle, as the digital expression of the Armenian church, is to be a bridge to humanity, to show this way, because it holds the authentic, we coined the term, we have it on the website now, OG Christianity. Why do we do things like this? Because to be contextually relevant. Because to speak in a language that people of today can relate to. This is part of the way we're adapting and being fluid. So in that context, some of the other flag planting achievements could be the first ever amphitheater, virtual in the metaverse, where we hosted a conversation with an Armenian Palestinian in the midst of the war. This happened about 8 months ago. Simultaneously, it was broadcast in Zoom for those who weren't ready to endeavor into a new technological space, and we also streamed it into this amphitheater that can hold 500 people, avatars from around the world, where you can come and meet and participate in dialogue. The next achievement we did was the first ever memorial, a virtual memorial where people could come together. In this case, it was on the loss of a child, a very sensitive topic, a very deep and heartfelt topic. And there were people who could not be present at the actual event in Los Angeles, but appreciated that they could log in a virtual way and be with everybody. So we see technology as a bridge to bring the world together, to do it from God's love, not from fear, because fear is destructive, and from love, it's constructive because we access creativity. Okay, creativity solves all problems in the world. Any problem you have in your personal life is resolvable from being creative. Any problem. And that is by first acknowledging, I'll give you a little moment of how I learned this from the teachings of Jesus. This is what's so cool. This is why I'm here, on my own free will. Because the keys to my own liberation came through a teacher that turns out the Armenian church preserved in my ancestral roots. Can you see the irony of the full circle? I didn't come to it because my mom took me to Sunday school. I came to it as seeking truth. And that's the point I didn't complete before, which was why the church is so important, because of all the aspects of society that exist today. The big banks, the big companies that make our iPhones, the celebrities. If you go back 2,000 years, do you know any of the bankers of those times? What was preserved about our Armenian roots? The actual most valuable treasure that any human today could ask for, which is the liberation of their heart, the solution to any problem, and the way to innovate for society, it would be how to access the intelligence of God. And if I was to see who was the most courageous, I would say it was the church, because they faced the most destructive energies of annihilation, and how they did it. They preserved the manuscripts, they preserved the teachings, they preserved it in the stone, and without them, we'd be lost. So when you feel depressed, in a way you could say, I'm in a momentary state of being lost with the truth of who I am. And that to realign to that is the peace found in the church. And I discovered, and this is because of my cousin's wife who's just here today. This is wild because she didn't know she was going to be here. Ceza, hi Ceza. Ceza played a pivotal role in my journey. Isn't that funny? I'm a deep lover of music as one form of expression. I was in a household inspired by art. My parents were collectors of contemporary art. So I arose my eyes. And isn't it interesting? These walls are covered with art. Have you ever seen a cathedral, a space, a diocese with so many paintings and works of art and sculptures everywhere and concerts? And all the places I've been, all the churches, I never saw so much art in one place. That means this is the hub. And they recognize the energy of creativity as an expression of the divine. And so that inspired me, being raised around art, every form from figurative to abstract, you name it, all the masters of the modern era were in New York City when I was a kid. But as I was getting ready to come west on a motorcycle, Ceza sends me a CD of the Duke music. And I had never heard, and remember the days of CDs? My entire wall was music. Of course, music is, but nothing brought a tear to my eye. No music I'd ever heard in my life. I owe a debt of gratitude to Ceza for sending me the Jivan Gasparian CD, which till today is my favorite. I would eventually collect every recording of Duduk music. And of course, I would find a Duduk master and ended up spending 10 years learning Duduk. And ended up traveling internationally playing, because I didn't speak Armenian, but I learned to speak the music of our ancestors. And guess what I learned? God's breath. So here's a cool thing. I know no other instrument in the world that teaches you the divine breath except for the Duduk. I'll tell you what that is briefly. How much time do I have left? We're there? Okay. I'll leave you with this, okay? To play the Duduk, 10 minutes? 10. Okay. Okay. See? Floating. In Duduk, to learn circular breathing, which brings you into a trance state. Okay? The state I'm saying of which allows creativity. See, now you learn to do that in life. You practice to hold that when someone's honking at you. Then you can stay creative when tension arises. But when you're in the church, we're learning to realign to that expression. And this resonance is a very important part of the transcendental shift. And where does the Duduk, the deep resonance of the Duduk come from? The breath is from the navel. And to do circular breathing is the highest form of meditation I've discovered in all my world travels, which include India, where they were the masters of yogic. But even them didn't have circular breathing. We have it. And what I just to bring conclusion to it, so Epostle is about sharing the wisdom of Armenian heritage in all these factors, and that includes the Duduk music, because it's part of aligning the human spirit back to its authentic nature so that we can transform this world. Instead of feel like the world is falling on us, we can become active co-creators by empowering ourselves back to alignment with our heart. And although I didn't touch on AI as much as I'd like to, but everyone else is, I will tell you this as a closing statement. AI is a tool constructed out of the consciousness of creativity. And when I tell you that creativity is the gift to humanity, when humanity is aligned with its true nature, it comes through them, that means creativity created AI. Humanity was just the servant of the creativity. We have the ability to be a vessel of this divine consciousness. Artificial intelligence is just that. It's just information. But divine intelligence, for which creativity flows, is not knowledge. It's literally the mind of God. Without me knowing what it is, I can't speak to what it is. I can only say I understand it by experience and living it. And when we all touch that expression, we can change the world together. Okay? Did you have any questions?
You're amazing.
We're speechless.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Can you explain the circular breathing?
Okay. Circular breathing, which it's very profound. I think everybody should learn how to do this. It's something we can maybe do in Sunday school with the kids. Because if we teach children how to hold their center, they won't lose the creativity. We can reclaim it. As Father Voskin said, we're here to learn, remember what we forgot. We can reclaim it. So no fear. It hasn't been lost to any of us. So the way the circular breathing works is this. You learn to first inhale from the navel. This is important because it stretches the muscle here, the diaphragm. Interestingly enough, in Chinese medicine, the diaphragm is where fear is held. So when you understand squeezing a sponge to get the toxin out, and what the water is to flush, to learn to, and go to a baptism and look at a child, the baby breathes from here. We become shallow breathers. So first is you learn to breathe from your navel again. Consciously, you have to do it because we became unconditioned to it. It will stretch the diaphragm and it helps release fear. Then, by doing it, you inhale through the nose. So inhale is always through the nose, not through the mouth. That's also part of the meditative. So if you're in church meditating and word with the resonance, it's inhale through the mouth. Inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth, and breathe from here. Then, as you know the fundamental instruction, perceive neutrally, which means don't judge. This keeps the mind clear. It's a practice. You will judge, but you'll know you're judging because you'll become tense. When you feel the tension, you breathe from here, you will let go of the judgment, say, I'm open. This is how we create possibility, a new possibility beyond our perception. And by keeping the mind open, the heart flowers. Because if you judge someone as this is bad, your heart will close. When you close the heart, it's not about being right. It's about the fact that you lose access to the divine guidance. And if you want a solution, you have no choice but to stay open, no matter how hard it is. That's the practice. And that's what the circular breathing develops, because you have to hold a meditative state. You have to learn how to circular breathe and not give in to the fear that in a concert setting, imagine, you confront fears. And we were taught how to do it with a straw and a glass of water. So if you want to learn circular breathing, get a glass of water, put a straw in it, and start to blow bubbles. And keep doing that. It might take a few months. Eventually, you'll be able to inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth, and you won't stop the bubbles. That's how you'll learn it. And this practice is, this may sound esoteric, but I'm saying this is fundamental to how the practice of Jesus' principles is how I understand this. And it can be a living reality for anybody who wants to. It doesn't require special knowledge and intelligence, a special DNA, special muscular capability. There's no age limits, nothing, as far as I can see. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg, for that. That was pretty incredible. It was very zen, so we all could, have our lunch, have a nice zen moment, learning a lot, and, going back to like your roots and why we do the things that we do.